They told me silence was the price of love. I paid it, until it cost me everything. My son believed my house, my life, even my grief belonged to him. But when I uncovered his plan to erase me, I didn't scream. I signed the papers, rewrote the will, and lit the match that burned our legacy clean. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the reckoning of a woman who finally said enough. 1. The inheritance of silence. Word count, approximately 1,050. They say houses breathe, but this one only sighs. The Whitfield estate sits on the edge of Covington, Georgia, an old, white-columned beast nestled between groaning magnolias and cracked stone pathways. It's the kind of place people admire from a distance, whispering about old money and legacy, as if those things come without cost. I've lived here for over 40 years, first as a bride, then a mother, then a widow. Now, I live here alone. My name is Grace Whitfield. I'm 66 years old. And for most of my life, I confuse silence with survival. I still sweep the porch every morning as I always have, still polish the silver on Sundays, still wear lipstick when I pour my first cup of coffee, though no one is here to notice. The house groans with memory, floorboards that creak beneath my feet in the same pattern they did when Colton used to run down the hallway in his cowboy boots. Only now, it's just me who hears them. Colton is my only child. He's 38 now, a sharp, successful man in a tailored life. After Richard died, Colton made it clear he was stepping up. But what that meant was fewer visits, short phone calls, and a parade of impersonal emails about tax documents, property assessments, and how "you're lucky we have things in place, Mom." He says he checks in. He says he's busy. But he forgets my birthday every year, even when the date sits next to his own in the family Bible. It wasn't always this way. When he was a boy, Colton used to crawl into my lap and say I was his safe place. He would sit at the kitchen table and draw me stick figures of us, always with him smiling and me holding his hand. I still have one pinned on the refrigerator, yellowed at the edges. But time does something strange to boys who are told they deserve everything. It turns them into men who believe someone else should pay the cost. Richard loved our son, but his love was conditional, strong as long as Colton performed, as long as he achieved. There was pride in his voice when Colton made captain of the debate team, but nothing but silence when our son came home crying over a breakup. Richard called emotion a distraction. I never said otherwise. I didn't dare. Because I knew what silence demanded. My mother, Lillian, taught me early that emotions were currency, and too much would bankrupt you. She ran our house like a courtroom, and I was always on trial. She mocked my softness, called me weak when I cried, and once told me I was only ever as valuable as the man who stands beside you. That line echoed through my wedding vows like a prophecy. After she passed, I thought maybe her voice would fade, but it only moved inside me, quieter now, harder to fight. Even now, decades later, I hear her when I look in the mirror without makeup. When Colton tells me I should be grateful, he's handling the estate. When I hesitate to speak up, again. This house was meant to be a haven. Richard and I built it after his parents passed, poured our savings into it, planted every rosebush together. But it became a theater for performance, Sunday bests, dinner served at 6, no raised voices, no unlocked doors. Colton learned early that power lives in silence, and I never showed him what it looks like to break it. These days, the mail is mostly catalogs and credit card offers. Colton's name is on the deed now, an old decision Richard insisted on. For simplicity. I nodded, like I always did. I cooked dinner for one. I watch the same channel every night, because I know when the news anchor will smile. It's a routine, a ritual. But lately, the silence doesn't feel like safety. It feels like warning. They don't write manuals for widowhood. They don't tell you that after the casseroles stop coming and the pews at the memorial empty, you're expected to just continue. To carry on folding shirts, pruning hedges, and setting 2 places at the table out of habit. That's what I did, because that's what I was raised to do. Every morning after Richard passed, I got up at 6, dressed, brushed my graying hair back into a bun, brewed coffee for one. I washed his clothes even after he was gone, folded them, and placed them back in his drawers, as if he might walk in one afternoon and need a fresh pair of socks. The house didn't feel empty. It felt watchful, as if it was waiting for me to misstep, to falter in the routine. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. Colton called the day after the funeral. His first words weren't, "Are you okay?" They were, "I've been thinking about how we should handle the estate." We. As if I hadn't spent every year of my adult life preserving this place. As if I hadn't sacrificed my dreams to raise him here. I remember the day I told Richard I'd been offered a scholarship to study literature at Tulane. He set his paper down without looking at me and said, "You'll be too busy being a mother to chase nonsense like that." I was 22, engaged, pregnant, and terrified of saying no to anyone but myself. So I became a mother. A good one, I think. I was present, soft-spoken, supportive. I attended every school recital, packed lunches with notes, told Colton he could be anything he wanted. But I also taught him that my needs didn't matter, so it didn't surprise me, years later, when he asked me to cash out part of Richard's life insurance to fund his tech startup. He didn't say please, he called it a mutual investment. When I asked how the business was doing 6 months later, he sighed and said, "Mom, I don't have time to explain things to you." I didn't ask again, because I'd been trained by Lillian, by Richard, by time, to hold my questions quietly. But lately, something had shifted. The cracks I'd ignored for decades had begun to let in air. The expectations I carried like heirlooms had started to suffocate me. I began journaling in the evenings, a cheap leather notebook tucked in my nightstand. Nothing grand, just sentences, fragments. Today, the house felt like a museum of things no one remembers. I said something at dinner. No one heard it. I don't think I'm invisible. I think I've been taught to disappear. One night, while organizing the hall desk drawer, I found Richard's old phone, one we'd used as a shared line for the house. I thought it might have old photos or messages from the early days. It was nearly dead, but curiosity got the better of me. I charged it, sat on the edge of the guest bed and scrolled. Most of it was junk. Voicemails from insurance reps, spam calls, Colton asking about bank routing numbers. Then I heard it. A message sent from Colton's number. Voice strained, slightly muffled. "Look, once she's gone, the estate's ours. I'm not waiting forever. We've already done enough. Just keep being sweet to her face until we can move the paperwork." I sat very still. My fingers hovered over the pause button. The room was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat ticking behind my ears. I played it again, just to be sure. He said, "Once she's gone." Not if. Once. Not love. Not legacy. Just convenience. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but the house was too quiet. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. Instead, I stood up, walked to the hallway mirror, and looked at my reflection. Lipstick perfect, sweater ironed, posture poised, and in my eyes, a woman waking up. Not all bruises bloom in color. Some settle in the soul, quiet, persistent, impossible to photograph. I spent years excusing things that should have left me screaming. There was the time Colton brought a girl home from college and introduced her as his maybe for now. She rolled her eyes when I asked if she wanted sweet tea and called the house antique in a creepy way. Colton laughed. Or the Thanksgiving he showed up late and left early telling me, "I've got places to be, Mom. You'll be fine." I'd cooked for 8 hours. He took a photo of the meal for Instagram, kissed my cheek, and disappeared before the pie was even sliced. Each time I told myself he's busy, he's young. He doesn't mean it, but he did. He meant all of it. He meant the condescension, the entitlement, the way he looked through me instead of at me. And God help me, I let him. When Richard passed, everything legal was handled by Douglas Hale, a stiff, courteous man with an office 2 blocks from the courthouse and an oak desk older than me. Douglas had been our family lawyer since Colton was born. He handled Richard's business affairs, estate taxes, insurance policies. When I sat in his office days after the funeral, he pushed a stack of documents across the desk with gentle authority. "These are just formalities, Grace. Most of this has already been set up under Colton's name, per Richard's direction. It'll keep things simple." I didn't question it. I was tired. Trying to remember how to breathe in a house that no longer echoed with my husband's voice. So I signed. Every line. I handed over the deed, the trust amendments, the succession plan. I gave my son control of everything without blinking, because I thought it was love, because I thought loyalty required it, and because I didn't know I had any other option. Now, years later, I've started to see how silence is more than absence. It's complicity. Delilah came to me through a local agency after Richard passed. She was meant to be temporary, twice a week house cleaning. But she stayed, not just because the work was consistent, but because she saw something I didn't. One morning, I caught her humming in the kitchen, rearranging the spice rack with a kind of reverence. "You know," she said, "this house is beautiful, but it feels like nobody's really living in it." I froze. "What do you mean?" Delilah shrugged. "Just seems like it's been in survival mode too long, like it's waiting for someone to let it breathe." She didn't say more. She didn't have to. Over time, Delilah became more than help. She became company. She started bringing lavender from her garden, fresh bread on Sundays. She asked questions no one else bothered to ask. "Did you sleep last night? When's the last time someone hugged you for no reason? Do you still dream, Grace?" She wasn't intrusive. She was present, and that presence began to chip away at the numbness. It was Delilah who pointed out that Colton hadn't visited in months, not since Richard's memorial plaque had been unveiled. "It's just how he is," I said one day, folding linens. Delilah didn't argue. She just said, "Doesn't mean it's how you have to be." She had a way of making silence feel less noble, less holy. I'd spent my life believing that being quiet meant being good, that if I kept things steady, people would appreciate me, that love would show up eventually, as long as I didn't ask too much of it. But maybe love that asks you not to speak isn't love at all. Maybe it's just control in softer clothing. They arrived late, they always did. Colton texted me from the driveway. "We're here. Need 10 minutes to take a call." I watched from the upstairs window as he paced near the hydrangeas, Bluetooth piece tucked into one ear, gesturing sharply. Blair sat in the passenger seat, reapplying her lipstick in the visor mirror. By the time they finally came inside, the pot roast had gone lukewarm. "Sorry, traffic," Blair said, brushing her perfectly manicured hand through air. "This town still doesn't believe in modern road planning." Colton kissed my cheek with a half-hearted press and barely looked me in the eye. His cologne clung too sharp, too sterile, like something meant to cover absence. I'd set the table with the china he used as a child, lit the candles, turned on soft piano music. I do this every time they come, as if setting the stage correctly might finally summon the boy who used to say, "I love you more than peanut butter, Mom." But that boy's gone. Blair wrinkled her nose as she walked into the dining room. "It's like stepping into a retirement magazine." She meant it as a joke. Maybe. I served dinner slowly, pretending not to notice the glances they shared when I offered seconds. When I brought out the lemon pie Colton used to ask for every birthday, Blair smirked. "She still bakes, huh? That's sweet." They moved to the sitting room after dessert. I excused myself, said I needed to check on the linen delivery. Truthfully, I just needed to breathe. That's when I heard them. I was in the hallway, paused beside the study door, when Blair's voice slipped through the crack. "She still thinks this is her house. How sad." Colton chuckled. "She's always been dramatic." "I mean, she's what, 60-something? We'll let her keep playing Queen of the Manor until she's too tired to fight." Then Blair said it. "Once we move in, I'm converting the study. It'll be the perfect dressing room." I froze. I had folded her napkin. I had refilled her water twice. I had served her husband dessert with the silver fork my mother gave me at my wedding. And she wanted my husband's study for perfume bottles. Later, when they were getting ready to leave, I asked Colton if he had a moment alone. He followed me to the porch. "I overheard you two earlier," I said quietly. "About the house, about the study." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be so emotional. You've had a good run." My mouth parted slightly, stunned. "A good run?" He laughed a little, dismissive. "This house is too much for you now. We're just thinking ahead." "You mean after I'm gone?" I asked. He didn't answer, just patted my shoulder like I was a patient he was tired of visiting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house at midnight, each room echoing with memories they no longer respected. I ran my hand along the bookshelves in Richard's study, the same ones he built by hand. The smell of cedar still lingered beneath the dust. Something told me to open the drawer in his old desk. The lock had long been broken. Inside were scattered papers, envelopes, a notepad with Richard's initials, and beneath them, 2 crisp pages, stapled, folded once. It was a legal draft, notarized. Colton's name was at the top: Whitfield Family Trust, Transfer Amendment. I read the lines slowly. My hands trembled. The document detailed a transfer of ownership of the Whitfield estate. Colton had already set up a new living trust, listing himself as the current property owner. Blair was named the sole beneficiary upon my passing. They weren't planning to wait. They were planning to take. I sat there for a long time, the paper heavy in my lap. The silence in the room no longer felt like grief. It felt like war. Some days, I swear, I can still smell my mother's perfume in the parlor, lavender and judgment. The mirror in the hallway has been there since I was a girl. It once hung in her bedroom, right above the vanity she never let me touch. When she passed, I inherited it. Not because she offered it, because I was the only one left to claim her things. Now it watches me like she used to. Critical, calculating, unimpressed. I stood in front of it the morning after Colton and Blair left, holding my lipstick in one hand but unable to move. The same mirror, the same bun pinned tight, the same pressed blouse. And I saw her. Not just my reflection. Hers. Lillian Whitfield. Proud, precise, impossible to satisfy. She raised me on rules, not love. On perfection, not presence. If I cried, I was weak. If I asked questions, I was difficult. She taught me that silence was a woman's sharpest survival skill, and I believed her. Standing there, I realized I had become the very ghost I swore I'd never channel. I'd mimicked her dignity, her structure, her endless endurance. And in doing so, I'd passed the same chains down to Colton. Not by malice, by modeling. My mother burned with bitterness and pride. I inherited the smoke. I dropped the lipstick back in the drawer. For the first time in decades, I didn't finish getting ready. I just stared. Later that day, Delilah came by. She brought lemon balm from her garden and a box of fresh scones. She saw the untouched breakfast, the drawn blinds, the pile of dishes I never used to leave in the sink. "You all right?" she asked. I nodded too quickly. She sat beside me at the kitchen table and placed the bundle of herbs down gently. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. "You're still here, but do you even see yourself anymore?" I blinked. Delilah didn't ask questions to pry. She asked to pull you back to yourself. I swallowed hard. Some days I feel like the house is living me, not the other way around. She reached across and touched my hand. "Then maybe it's time to change the locks." That afternoon, I found the number I never thought I'd dial. It was scribbled on the back of a brochure I picked up months ago from the public library, right after a free estate planning seminar I'd walked into by accident. Vaughn Legal Group, specialists in family trusts and elder advocacy. I remembered the speaker, a tall, composed black woman with a steady voice and eyes that didn't blink when she said, "Sometimes protecting your peace means protecting your property." I'd tucked the flyer into my purse and forgotten about it. Until now. I dialed. A warm voice answered. Her assistant. I asked for a private consultation. No details. She said, "Cassandra will see you Friday at noon." I hung up, heart pounding. It felt like lighting a match in a house soaked in gasoline. The law office wasn't far from the square, tucked between a florist and an old jewelry shop. But walking into it felt like stepping into another life, one where I wasn't just someone's mother or someone's widow, one where I was someone. Cassandra Vaughn greeted me without pretense, no over-smiling, no condescension, just presence. She wore navy slacks, no jewelry but a watch, her nails short, her voice clean. We sat in her office beneath soft lamplight while I laid it all out. Years of silence, the deed Colton manipulated, the draft trust I found in the study, the voicemail I couldn't forget. She listened. Didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she tapped her pen lightly against her notepad. "You understand what this means, Grace," she said. "If we move forward with this, there's no going back." I nodded. She leaned forward slightly. "You'll have to be willing to lose him." I took a long breath, stared out the window. The magnolia tree outside reminded me of the one Colton fell from as a boy. He broke his wrist, cried until I carried him in the house. I'd stayed up all night icing his arm, whispering promises of safety. "I already have," I said. "I just haven't signed the papers yet." Cassandra didn't blink. She simply turned the page in her binder. "There's a clause in your existing estate framework, a legacy provision. It allows the primary property holder to name a successor not bound by blood, but by demonstrable ongoing care and regard. Richard had it added years ago, likely because of business liabilities. Meaning? Meaning, she said, you can leave this house, this land, everything, not to Colton, but to someone who's shown they truly care for you, someone who's earned it. The weight of the sentence landed like a stone dropped gently on silk. For a moment, I said nothing. Then I reached for the pen. We worked quietly, efficiently. Cassandra guided me through every signature, every clause, every detail of the new draft. I crossed out Colton's name. I crossed out Blair's. And when she asked who would be listed as the new heir, I didn't hesitate. Delilah Rhodes. Cassandra looked up. Your housekeeper? My friend, I said. My lifeline. She nodded. We added the necessary provisions. Set up safeguards. Rebuilt the trust from the ground up. This time not out of fear, but choice. Afterward, I went home to a quiet house that didn't feel so heavy. Delilah was in the garden when I returned, wearing her sun hat, hands in the soil. I stood there a moment, watching her coax tomatoes into bloom. She looked up, smiled. You okay? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over and hugged her. No explanation, no warning. She held on without question. In that moment, I realized war doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it begins in silence, with a signature, with a pen held steady by a shaking hand. And sometimes, that's enough to start a revolution. I ironed the linens twice, took the crystal out of storage, used the bone china I hadn't touched since Richard's 60th birthday, even lit the ivory tapers from our anniversary set, the ones we swore we'd use for special occasions. Tonight was one of those occasions, a farewell, though they didn't know it yet. I made the buttermilk roast chicken Colton used to request every Easter, hand-whipped the potatoes, baked the pecan pie from scratch, using Mama's recipe with just a little less vinegar than she'd like. The house smelled like memory. At 6:43 p.m., Colton and Blair arrived, 3 minutes late, just enough to signal disinterest. Smells like 1985, Blair said as she walked in, eyes sweeping over the floral wallpaper with a smirk. Charming in a kind of retro retirement way. Colton didn't remove his shoes, didn't glance up from his phone. Looks good, Mom, he muttered as he passed the dining table, eyes on whatever business deal or golf score mattered more. We sat. Grace, Colton, Blair. A triangle with no symmetry. Soft jazz from the old stereo filled the background. The same album Richard used to play when he wanted to impress dinner guests. It had scratches now, ghosts in the sound, but it still played. We bowed our heads for grace. I spoke the prayer. Blair peeked at her phone. Colton texted under the table. Amen, I said, alone. The tension didn't take long to rise. It simmered between the clinks of silverware, the forced small talk, the way Blair giggled when she leaned back and said, God, Grace, do you ever wear anything but pearls? I smiled tightly. Only when I want to feel like myself. Colton chuckled. That's the problem. She's always in character. Blair laughed too. Overbearing matriarch chic. He raised his glass to that. I sipped my water. Then, midway through the second course, honey-glazed carrots and asparagus, Colton asked, So, any thoughts on finally moving into a retirement community, Mom? You've got to be exhausted keeping this place up. Blair added, We found this beautiful gated spot in Savannah. They do Sunday socials and everything. I looked up from my plate, my expression steady. No, I said. I'm not moving. Colton rolled his eyes. Mom, come on, it's time. No, I repeated, folding my napkin. You are. They both stared. You won't be inheriting this house, I said. The air froze. What? Colton asked, blinking like he'd misheard. I said, I repeated calmly, you will not be inheriting this house, or any part of the estate. Blair's wineglass slipped. Excuse me? I kept my eyes on Colton. The will has been changed. The trust is closed. The new one is finalized. He stood slowly, pushing his chair back with an ugly scrape. Are you insane? No, I said. I'm just awake. You can't do this, he snapped. Dad built this house for us. You owe it to the family. I owe no one anything, I said. Blair sputtered. This is mental deterioration. You need help. Colton leaned across the table. You've gone senile. This isn't legal. You don't have the mental capacity. I have the clarity I never had when I was doing your laundry and funding your dreams, I said, voice even. Don't mistake quiet for weakness again, Colton. He stared at me. No laughter now, no charming indifference. Just a red flush creeping up his neck. You'll regret this, he hissed. I'll contest everything. You can try. I stood then, reached for the pie dish, brought it to the table. You used to love this, I said, setting it down. Before you decided I was just the woman standing between you and your next investment. Neither touched a slice. They left without saying goodbye. When the door closed, I blew out the candles one by one. The house didn't feel hollow, it felt clean. The house was still humming with the heat of their exit when I returned to the dining room. The candles were melted to stumps, plates untouched. Silence reigned, but it wasn't the same silence that had haunted me for decades. This one felt earned. I sat in the chair I'd occupied for nearly every dinner for 40 years, always hosting, always quiet, always serving. Then I reached for my left hand. The wedding ring had never come off. Not when Richard died, not when Colton first rolled his eyes at me, not when I signed the trust paperwork that unknowingly sealed my financial fate. I twisted it once, twice, slid it free, placed it in the center of the dining table. It didn't make a sound when it hit the wood, but in my chest, something cracked, and something else began. They all had written parts of me. Lillian's script had no room for softness. Richard's edits left no margins for voice. Colton's additions treated me like a footnote. But I still had the pen. Delilah came in from the kitchen a moment later. She must have heard them leave, heard the silence swell. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't cry. I had done enough weeping in quiet rooms, enough swallowing sobs into night pillows, enough folding grief into casseroles. Now I was empty, but not broken. After she left, I went to my study. No longer Richard's, no longer a museum. Mine. The lamp cast a warm pool of light across the desk. I pulled out the new will Cassandra had prepared, slid it in front of me, picked up the pen. With each stroke of ink, I erased a lifetime of silent surrender. Under primary beneficiary, I wrote Delilah Rhodes. Next to it, for compassion given without expectation, and for reminding me I still had a voice. I signed it, not as Mrs. Whitfield, not as a widow, not as a mother, just Grace. I left the documents on the desk, didn't file them, didn't seal them, let them breathe for once. Then I went to bed. It was the first night in years I didn't dream of being chased through my own house. The next morning, the mail came late, past 11. I shuffled through catalogs, a final notice for Colton's forgotten insurance premium, and a letter in handwriting I hadn't seen in 2 decades. The return address read, Reagan Whitfield, my sister's daughter. She'd disappeared after Lillian's funeral. There had been a falling out, politics, inheritance, too much buried shame. I hadn't heard from her since. I tore the envelope open slowly, unsure if my hands were shaking from fear or hope. Inside was a single-page letter. Dear Aunt Grace, I don't know if this letter will reach you, or if you'll even want to read it. But I've spent the last few years trying to unbury the damage in our family, and I keep coming back to you. You were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't a mistake. If there's space in your life, I'd like to see you. I've changed. I hope you have too. Love, Reagan. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it neatly and placed it on top of the will. Because maybe the fire I lit didn't just burn the past. Maybe it cleared the way for something better to grow. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, just after the rain let up. I watched her from the porch as she stepped out of the rideshare, suitcase in one hand, brown leather satchel over the other shoulder. Her hair was darker now, cropped short at the neck, but the eyes were still the same, sharp, guarded, waiting to be told whether she could exhale. Hi, Aunt Grace, she said. The words cracked something open in me. I nodded. Come in. I made iced tea. We sat in the sunroom, windows open to the garden. The roses were just beginning to bloom again. Reagan sipped her tea in silence for a while, glancing around the house like it was both foreign and familiar. It smells the same, she said, like cedar and coffee. She didn't cry. Neither did I. Later, we walked through the house room by room. She paused at the hallway mirror, the one that had reflected 3 generations of silence. She didn't say a word, but her hand brushed the frame like it held ghosts she still hadn't buried. That night, we talked. She told me about the foster family she ran to after her mother, my sister, called her ungrateful for asking to see a therapist, about couch surfing during college, about working as a trauma counselor now for women with high-control families. I see parts of myself in every intake file, she said, and parts of you too. We didn't talk about Lillian. We didn't need to. Her shadow hung heavy enough without name. On Wednesday, I asked if she'd help me repaint the guest bedroom. She blinked. Seriously? It needs it. I thought a soft blue. She nodded. We covered the furniture in sheets, opened the windows, and rolled the paint across the walls in silence at first. Then with laughter. Then stories. I remember you teaching me how to sew a button, Reagan said, dipping her brush again. I remember thinking no one had ever looked at me with that much patience. You were 11, I said. You were supposed to be messy. No one told me that then. By the time the walls dried, the room felt different. Not just brighter, but released. Delilah came by that evening with banana bread and saw us on the porch. Well, she smiled, looks like someone's starting to live in this house again. She joined us for coffee. After Reagan went inside, Delilah leaned over and said, You ever think about what you want this house to be now? I nodded. Actually, I do. She raised an eyebrow. I want to open a foundation, I said, for women like me, women like Reagan, women who were taught that belonging has to be earned through silence. Delilah's smile deepened. Then you're going to need help. I looked at the doorway where Reagan had just disappeared, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The ribbon was a pale gold, tied across the front porch railings where Richard's old flag used to hang. The front yard had been cleared, flower beds replanted with wildflowers. The plaque read, The Whitfield Center for Women's Resilience, a space to reclaim, rebuild, remember. It wasn't just a name change. It was an inheritance reclaimed, not in dollars, but in direction. We didn't host a big launch, no gala, no press. Just neighbors, local women's advocates, some city council members, and a few chairs set out on the lawn. Enough to say, we're here, and we matter. I gave the first speech from the front steps. My voice didn't tremble, not once. I spent most of my life believing that silence was survival, that being needed was the same as being loved, that inheritance only flowed one way, downhill. I was wrong. True legacy is the courage to break what broke you, and build again. The crowd stood quiet, many with their heads bowed. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. Inside the house, the rooms had been transformed. The parlor was now a group counseling space, softly lit with lavender walls and shelves of books about trauma, healing, boundaries, and resilience. Richard's office, now Delilah's command center. The upstairs guest room, Reagan's new sanctuary. Reagan officially signed on as program director. Delilah agreed to manage operations. I've been managing your life for years anyway, she teased. We hosted our first story circle that weekend. 6 women, 1 candle, a room full of open chairs. I told my story, not from behind a podium, but from across a table, holding a chipped mug and steady breath. They didn't hear a cautionary tale. They heard survival. In the evenings I sat in the kitchen, journaling again, but now the pages didn't bleed. They built, until the envelope arrived, thick, legal weight paper. The return address wasn't Colton's, it was his attorney's. Injunction notification, estate interference due to mental incapacity allegation. I read it once, then again. Colton had filed a formal claim with the court arguing that I was not mentally competent when I changed the trust. He submitted supporting documents from a private doctor I'd never met and included statements claiming emotional instability, undue influence, and delusional tendencies. It was every fear weaponized, every cliché about aging women wielded like a knife. He hadn't spoken to me since the dinner, and now he wanted the state to say I was unfit to own my own life. Delilah read the notice with a clenched jaw. That boy doesn't want an inheritance. He wants control. Reagan didn't flinch. We fight back, I nodded, but we don't stoop. We stand. That night I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I took the injunction paperwork, filed it next to the first will, the one that gave everything to the son who gave nothing. Then I made tea. Because the war wasn't over, but I finally knew which side I was on. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of silence people wear when they're waiting for someone to break. Colton sat at the plaintiff's table in a crisp charcoal suit, the same smirk he wore to his father's funeral etched across his face. Blair sat beside him, legs crossed, diamond pendant gleaming in the fluorescent light. My hands were still as I clutched my notepad. Cassandra sat beside me, her presence like steel under silk. The bailiff called court to order. The judge, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, glanced over his glasses at the room. He didn't smile. The opening arguments felt like a performance I'd already lived through in 1,000 different conversations. Colton's attorney framed the issue in terms of mental decline, recent personality shifts, and outside manipulation. They pointed to Delilah and Reagan as non-familial influencers. I listened quietly. They brought out statements, phone records, financial documents, excerpts from my will, as if paperwork could reveal the soul behind a signature. Then came my turn. I took the stand. The courtroom didn't hush. It held its breath. Cassandra guided me gently, question by question. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, "can you tell the court why you made the changes to your estate?" "Because I finally understood that love without respect is not family," I said, "and because I realized legacy shouldn't be a reward for cruelty." There were murmurs in the gallery. The judge tapped his gavel once. I didn't look away. I spoke of my mother's bitterness, of Richard's firm hand, of the nights Colton left me waiting for calls that never came. I didn't dramatize. I recited. "This house is not just lumber and nails," I said. "It's where I learned silence. It's where I passed that silence down. I'm not proud of that, but I am proud that I finally decided to end it." Cassandra asked if I felt coerced when I named Delilah and Reagan as beneficiaries. "No," I said. "I felt seen." Then it was Colton's turn. He stood, posture perfect, voice calm. Too calm. "She's not the same," he said. "She's paranoid. She thinks we're out to get her." He listed my forgotten birthdays, my sudden change in personality, the obsessive journaling. He said Reagan had reinserted herself after 20 years to prey on a grieving woman. He called Delilah a manipulative opportunist. When asked why he hadn't visited in over a year, he blamed work travel. The courtroom shifted. Then Blair took the stand. At first she smiled, spoke in clipped politeness, talked about Grace's deteriorating routine, how she found documents hidden in drawers, and how Grace had accused them of plotting. Under cross-examination, Cassandra pulled up texts. One, dated 3 months prior. "Once she's out, I'm redesigning the study." "God, I can't wait." Blair's face paled. Then came the voicemail, the one Colton left that I'd saved on Richard's old phone. "Once she's gone, the estate's ours. I'm not waiting forever." It played into the silence like a stone dropped in still water. The courtroom exhaled, soft gasps, shifting bodies. Colton stood, shouting, "That was taken out of context." The judge silenced him. When he delivered his ruling, it was firm. "There is no evidence to support the claim of mental incapacity. The defendant, Mrs. Grace Whitfield, acted within her legal rights and demonstrated clear, consistent autonomy. The petition is dismissed in full." Colton didn't wait. He stormed out of the courtroom, shoulder brushing mine without a word. Blair trailed behind him, her heels clicking a little faster than pride usually allows. I remained seated, not to gloat, to breathe. Cassandra touched my hand. Delilah stood at the back of the courtroom, eyes wet but chin high. Reagan smiled, not in victory, but in relief. And me? I felt weightless, not because I won, because I didn't fold. The porch swing creaked softly beneath me as the breeze moved through the wisteria. It was spring again, early May, the kind where the air still held the tail end of winter's hush, but the light had turned forgiving. Inside, I could hear faint laughter. Someone was setting up chairs in the parlor for the next resilience workshop. I caught the familiar sound of Reagan's voice, directing, smiling, and the steady shuffle of Delilah humming as she rearranged the flower vases on the entry table. The Whitfield house no longer echoed with the silence of duty. It pulsed now, with life, with choice. I opened the small leather journal I kept by the rocker. It wasn't for bookkeeping anymore. It wasn't for grief. It was a place I wrote to the one person I'd always left out of every will, every decision, every kindness. Me. At the top of the blank page, I wrote, "To the woman I used to be." You were tired for so long, you forgot what it meant to want something. You believed that being useful was the same as being loved, that being a mother meant forfeiting the right to boundaries, that being a wife meant swallowing dreams before they ever had time to form. I know how many nights you stayed up, listening for the front door, hoping silence meant peace and not punishment. I know how much you gave away before you ever asked what you were allowed to keep. But here's what I want you to know now. You made it. I gave you back the house. Not just the building, but the space. The air no longer waits for permission. It welcomes. I gave you back the name. Not the one on the trust. The one that holds its own weight. Grace. Full of it, finally. And I gave you peace. It doesn't come in silence. It comes in laughter, in voices that don't ask you to shrink, in mornings where no one demands your shape fit their design. You don't owe anyone anything now. I closed the notebook slowly, pressing the page flat with my hand. Delilah stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "They're asking if you want to speak again today," she said with a knowing smile. "Not today," I replied. "Today I'm just listening." She sat beside me and nodded toward the far end of the porch, where Reagan had just hung a framed photo on the wall near the door. It was a candid, taken a month ago. The three of us standing beneath the new brass sign just beyond the garden gate. It read, "Family, the ones who stayed." I didn't ask for the photo, didn't pose for it, didn't even know the moment would matter. But now, it was everything. If Grace's story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who still thinks silence is love. Leave a comment if you've ever given too much, stayed too long, or finally chose yourself. Your voice matters. Let's rewrite what family means, together.